As the situation in the Strait of Hormuz heats up, it's not just the US and Iran watching closely. Other countries are gradually getting involved because the whole world can feel the effects of what's happening. Mark Rutte himself said that NATO is already looking for ways to respond to the crisis. This means the situation is now serious and can no longer be ignored. There are also reports that some US allies are ready to help monitor the strait, but until now, there is still no final decision whether this will go ahead while the operation continues. Countries are moving cautiously because they know that if more parties get involved, the conflict could escalate even further. But even without a concrete group, the effects of what the US is doing are already being felt. Along the shores of the Strait of Hormuz, Iran's underground missile launch sites are being destroyed one by one because of the use of bunker-busting bombs. These are the places they used to use to threaten ships. These are gradually disappearing, and along with this, their ability to control the passage is weakening. It may not happen immediately, but it's clear that their strength in the area is slowly diminishing, and Iran's problems don't end there. Even when it comes to drones, there's a new challenge coming. There may be help from Ukraine using interceptor drones. These are drones that don't just attack, but can intercept and destroy other drones before they can cause any damage. But before we start, don't forget to like this video. It means a lot to us content creators. Thank you very much, and now let's get started. If this kind of technology is deployed in the Strait of Hormuz, it will make it even harder for Iran to use the drone strategy they have long relied on. At this point, the battle is no longer just about the number of weapons. It's now about how quickly you can adjust your strategy. Whoever can adapt faster has the advantage. And as the situation drags on, one thing becomes clearer. This is no longer just a simple fight between two countries. It's getting bigger, and other countries could get involved if it can't be controlled. Suddenly, the flow of oil to Japan stopped. And that's when other countries started to feel the real effects of what's happening. The countries that claimed it wasn't their war gradually realized that they themselves were being affected, not by bullets, but by the economy. As oil prices rose, they also struggled. And that's when they saw that even if they weren't directly involved in the fight, they were still affected. By March 19th, it became clear that the whole world was on alert. The United Kingdom, France, Germany, Italy, the Netherlands, and Japan all released statements at the same time. They condemned Iran's attacks, and they said they were ready to take steps to stabilize the energy market and to ensure the continuous and safe passage of ships through the Strait of Hormuz. But it didn't end with just words, because on the same day, actions quickly escalated. A global military coalition was formed, led by the US, with a total of 22 countries joining. These countries agreed to send naval forces, submarine defense systems, and other equipment directly to the Strait of Hormuz. This is no longer just simple support because they now have an actual presence at sea. One of the driving forces behind the formation of this coalition was the strong pressure from the US. Donald Trump himself delivered a clear message to the allies. In a meeting with Shigeru Ishiba at the Oval Office, he directly requested military support from Japan, a country that is almost 90% dependent on oil from the Gulf. To emphasize his point, he mentioned the attack on Pearl Harbor as a reminder of what can happen when you're not prepared for a sudden attack. This wasn't just a simple reference, but a clear message that there was no longer an option to remain neutral. You couldn't just watch while everything was happening. If you're affected, you need to take action and be part of the solution. And this means sending support, sending ships, and helping to guard the Strait of Hormuz. At this point, it's no longer just a regional issue. It has grown and become a global issue where the effects are felt in every country that relies on energy. And as more join the coalition, it becomes clearer that what is happening is no longer just simple tension, but a bigger fight to maintain the flow of oil and prevent more serious problems in the world economy. Now the question is, how will the 22-nation coalition move in the Strait of Hormuz? They won't just enter all at once without a plan. There is a clear strategy that will be divided into 4 phases to ensure that the operation is smooth and continuous. In the first phase, the focus is on clearing sea mines. The coalition will deploy ships capable of searching for mines, as well as underwater drones and helicopters that can detect and destroy them. Countries with strong naval capabilities, such as the United Kingdom and Japan, will help with this. This won't be finished right away because it's difficult to find mines at sea, and it could take weeks or even months. But even though it's just starting, it already has an effect because it sends a signal that something is being done to make the passage safe again. In the second phase, escorting the tankers will begin. This is like a modern version of Operation Earnest Will, where ships from different countries will guard and accompany the oil and gas tankers as they pass through the strait. The U.S. will no longer do this alone because the responsibility will now be shared among many countries. Because of this, the passage of ships becomes safer and the fear of shipping companies is reduced. In the third phase, aerial patrol and surveillance will begin. There will be continuous monitoring from the air to immediately detect missile activity, drone launch sites, and Iran's fast boats. This includes assets from the US, Australia, Saudi Arabia, United Kingdom, and Qatar. With this kind of setup, Iran will have a hard time launching a quick attack because almost every move they make will be detected immediately. The monitoring is real-time, so the response is faster. In the fourth phase, this is where the direct targeting of Iran's ability to attack begins. The coalition will use coordinated strikes with air forces and aircraft carriers to hit missile sites, drone bases, and locations where fast boats are hidden. They're not just clearing the sea, but also removing Iran's ability to pose a threat in the future. This means it's not just a temporary solution, but a long-term measure. While these phases are happening, the pressure continues to increase. There's another U.S. aircraft carrier on the way, and thousands of Marines are being deployed to the region. There are also talks about a possible ground operation on Karg Island, which is important for Iran's oil exports. It's not just military action because there's also an economic side to the conflict. Other countries are releasing oil reserves to prevent prices from rising too much, and other oil producers are also being encouraged to increase their output to fill the supply shortage. Overall, this is not just a simple operation. This is a combination of military and economic pressure being applied at the same time. And the goal is clear: to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, restore the normal flow of energy, and remove Iran's ability to use this as a way to put pressure on other countries. As the situation in the Strait of Hormuz worsens, Iran is struggling not only militarily, but also economically. There have been consecutive actions taken against them, such as freezing bank accounts, canceling business visas, and tightening restrictions on suspicious cargo. Because of this, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps is finding it more difficult to conduct operations outside the country. Their previous methods of evading sanctions, such as using middlemen and front companies, are now more closely monitored and often considered illegal. Because of this, global companies are more afraid to do business with them, so fewer are willing to make deals. At the same time, one of Iran's most important sources of income, oil, has also been affected. Because of the tightening in the Strait of Hormuz and the continuous pressure to reduce the money coming into the country, foreign currency is running short, and as income decreases, the situation inside gets worse. The government's promises about progress and security are gradually fading from public view. In many places, access to food and clean water is becoming difficult. This is no longer a simple inconvenience, but a serious problem that is felt every day. As prices rise and supply decreases, the situation becomes harder to control. The old explanation that there are enemies outside is no longer enough because now the problem is felt inside the country in everyday life. And while ordinary people are struggling, something else is happening inside the government. There are people at the top who are starting to take out their money and are looking for ways to leave the country. This means that even they are being cautious and are not sure about what will happen. When the people inside the government itself are preparing to leave, it's clear that there's a problem with the foundation. If you look at the bigger picture, the support that Iran was expecting from other countries is also not happening. China and Russia have not provided clear military assistance and remain on the sidelines. In the face of the 22-nation coalition in the Strait of Hormuz, they prefer not to intervene directly. And in this situation, one thing becomes clearer. Iran is not only struggling with pressure from outside, but also from within their own country. And when external problems and internal problems happen at the same time, that's when the most dangerous situation begins. Amidst the worsening crisis, it's clear that even the major countries are being cautious. China, which heavily relies on oil from Iran, can't just enter into a direct conflict. Even though they need the supply, they can't face the combined strength of the United States and its allies in the Strait of Hormuz. That's why they're acting quietly and cautiously. Their tankers take more complicated routes and sometimes use exemptions to get through. But it's clear they're avoiding direct confrontation because the cost is too high. On the other hand, Russia's situation is different. As oil prices rise, they earn more, so they benefit from what's happening. But that doesn't mean they can act freely. Because of the ongoing sanctions and the war in Ukraine, there's only so much they can do to help Iran. They don't have enough power to deploy naval or air support to the Gulf. All they can provide is limited assistance, like information from satellites, and most of the time they do this quietly. This isn't enough to change the course of the battle. Meanwhile, Iran's other expected allies are barely noticeable. Syria is silent, and so is North Korea. Faced with the large modern naval forces in the region, they have not taken any concrete action. It's even more notable that some major Muslim countries in the region, such as Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Oman, and the United Arab Emirates, did not side with Iran. Instead, they chose to support maintaining order in the region. This means it's no longer a simple fight between two sides. It's not just the U.S. against Iran. In a broader perspective, Iran is facing many countries that want to maintain a stable situation. Here, it becomes even more evident that Iran is isolated. They are gradually being surrounded, not just militarily, but also in terms of relations with other countries and in the economy. And as this happens, a bigger question arises. Is this the beginning of a change in how the world operates? A situation where countries cooperate more quickly when there is a threat to stability. As events continue to unfold, one thing is clear. This is no longer a simple regional conflict. It is growing and becoming part of a bigger change in the world. This is where the most important question arises. When you have 22 countries holding a significant portion of the world's air and naval power standing before you, what options are left? In a normal battle, if the two forces face each other directly, Iran would have almost no chance of lasting. It's that simple. Their ships, especially the older and lighter ones, can't keep up with the coalition's modern jets, missiles, and defense systems. They can be overwhelmed in just a few seconds. So it's clear that this is no longer about winning in a direct fight. Iran's approach is different. They're not trying to win in a direct confrontation. Their goal is to make the area hard to operate in, chaotic and dangerous for the enemy. This is what's called access denial. You may not win, but you'll make sure the enemy can't move freely either. To do that, they have three methods. First, secretly laying mines. They might use small submarines and boats that look like fishing vessels to lay smart mines at night, in places where it's not easy to lay, spot, or immediately guard them. The goal is to make it risky for any ship to pass through. Second, using the surroundings. On the coast, there are mountains and tunnels where missile launchers can hide. From there, they can launch sudden attacks. It's like a hit and run. You don't know where it's coming from, then suddenly there's a missile heading for the target. Third, the use of proxies. For example, the movements of groups like the Houthis to attack through other routes like the Red Sea. The goal here is to divide the coalition's attention. When there are problems in two places, it will be harder for them to focus. But even with these methods, one thing is clear. This is not enough to defeat the coalition. It can slow down their movements. It can disrupt the situation. It can increase the risk. But it won't change the overall balance of the conflict. In the end, What Iran is doing is not to win, but to prolong the fight and make it more difficult. And this makes it more costly for the enemy. As the situation continues in the Strait of Hormuz, there is another important thing that needs to be understood. This is not just a fight at sea or a military battle, because information also plays a big part in this kind of conflict. With every movement of a ship, every flight of a drone, and every use of a missile, there is a possibility that coalition systems can immediately detect it, like satellites, radar, and surveillance aircraft. This means they can detect threats earlier and respond more quickly. This is a major advantage of the coalition because they are not only strong, but they can also detect and act quickly. On the other side, Iran is trying to hide their movements. They use tactics such as mixing military assets with ordinary ships, constantly changing the location of their launchers, and sometimes placing decoy targets to confuse the enemy. But even with these methods, it's hard for them to keep doing it continuously because so many are watching them. With every move, there's a risk of being spotted immediately, and once they're seen, the coalition's response will be quick. As time goes by, it becomes harder for Iran to hide their equipment and movements. At the same time, commercial ships passing through the strait are also feeling a significant impact. Not all ships are military because most of them are carrying oil, gas, and other products. When there is a threat, they don't just enter even if the passage is open. Out of fear, they choose to avoid or wait. And when this happens, the supply to different countries is affected. This is where insurance comes in. When the risk in a place is high, the insurance cost for ships also increases. Sometimes it reaches a point where it's no longer worth it to travel. So even without a direct attack, the movement of trade still slows down. This is one of the reasons why what the coalition is doing is important, because they're not only protecting the ships, but they're also reducing the risk so that the normal flow of trade can return. The longer the operation goes on, the more expensive the fight becomes for Iran. They need to spend on their equipment, they need to adjust their strategy, and they need to be careful with every move. As they do this, their resources are gradually being depleted. On the other hand, the coalition has broader support because many countries are helping. They have more resources and they can last longer. And here we see an important point. This is not just a battle of who is stronger at the start, but who can endure in the midst of pressure. Coordination is important in this situation. Countries can't just act on their own. They need to move together with clear communication and quick decision-making. As the coalition's coordination improves, their operations become more effective. On the other side, as time goes by, Iran becomes more cautious. They no longer just attack outright. Instead, they choose to avoid and adjust. And this is exactly the effect of pressure. When you're forced to change your tactics and retreat, it means the enemy's strategy is working. In the end, what's happening in the Strait of Hormuz is not just a simple clash. This is a battle where one side is trying to control the passage while the other is trying to keep it open. And as this continues, it becomes clearer that control over this area is not just about location, but about who has the power to keep the world moving. Because when this passage shuts down, it's not just one country that's affected, but the whole world. As the situation in the Strait of Hormuz continues, there's another effect that's not immediately noticed but is felt around the world. This is the effect on supply chains. When the flow of ships slows down or stops, it's not just oil that's affected, but also other products that pass through the same route. This includes raw materials, food, and products that different countries need every day. When their delivery is delayed, there will be supply shortages. And when supply is low, prices go up, not just with oil, but also with other products. So even if a country is far from the Strait of Hormuz, they still feel the effects on their economy. At the same time, companies that rely on regular delivery of goods are also affected. When the supply doesn't arrive on time, they're forced to change their plans, look for another source, or raise their prices. In the end, it's still ordinary people who feel this in their daily expenses. As the situation drags on, shipping companies become more cautious. They don't just check if the route is open, but also how safe it is. Even with coalition escorts, if the risk is still high, some will still choose to avoid or wait. Because of this, there are changes in the shipping routes. Some ships take a longer route to avoid the Strait of Hormuz, but the trade-off is a longer journey, higher fuel costs, and longer delivery times. All of these add pressure to the global economy. On the other hand, countries with their own oil supply gain an advantage. The impact on them is less compared to countries that rely on imports, but even they are not completely safe because the global market is interconnected. When prices go up in one place, it's felt elsewhere. As the conflict continues, it becomes clearer that this is not just about who controls the Strait of Hormuz, but about how the entire global trade system will be affected. Every decision, every move, and every attack has an impact not just on the battlefield itself. At the same time, it also affects the financial markets. When there is news about rising tensions, it is immediately reflected in oil prices and stock market movements. When there is an attack, prices go up. When there are signs of improvement, prices go down. This means that every movement in the Strait of Hormuz is directly connected to the economies of different countries. And as the situation becomes more unpredictable, investors become more cautious. They prefer to avoid risk and move their money to safer investments. This adds to the costs in countries affected by the crisis. In the end, what's happening in the Strait of Hormuz is like a domino effect. It only takes one move to affect many parts of the world. This isn't just about the military or politics, but about how people's daily lives are impacted. And as the situation continues, it becomes even clearer that the stability of one place is important not just for the region, but for the whole world. When there's a problem in a critical passage like the Strait of Hormuz, it's not just one country that's affected, but almost every country. As the effects of the situation deepen, it becomes even clearer that the problem is not just about the present, but also about the future. If this kind of setup lasts, there's a possibility that countries will change the way they handle this kind of crisis. They might look for alternative routes for oil, invest in alternative energy, or build up more reserves so they won't be immediately affected next time. In this way, what's happening now isn't just a temporary problem, but a wake-up call for many countries. They see how important a passage like the Strait of Hormuz is and how big the effect is when there's a problem there. At the same time, countries are becoming more cautious with their next decisions. They are no longer just looking at the current situation, but also its long-term effects. Because of what's happening, it is becoming clearer that stability in these critical areas cannot be ignored. As time goes by, one thing becomes clearer. The battle in the Strait of Hormuz is not just about strength, but about who can adapt and continue even under pressure. And as all of this continues, it becomes more evident that every move in the Strait of Hormuz has an effect on the whole world. This is not just a battle between countries, but a situation that is felt even in people's daily lives. Pow?